Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our special office hours. Before we start, I want to do a couple of announcements. Next Monday, June 11th, midnight, anywhere on Earth, the Runaway Robot Project is due on T-Square. You can run it, you can test it on Udacity, but you need to submit it to T-Square to get your grade. Also, I do recommend that after you submit it to T-Square, you go back to T-Square assignments, you download the code, paste it back into Udacity, and run it again, just to make sure that you uploaded exactly what you wanted. You didn't accidentally introduce any typos or anything like that. The next week, Monday, June 18th, Project 1 is due on T-Square as well. I recommend you finish Project 1 before you go ahead and move on to problem set 4 and 5 in the mini project. We have the mini project PID posted, so if you're done with everything, you can work ahead if you want. Project 2 is visible as a draft on Piazza, and I'll be posting that on T-Square probably within a couple of days. Okay, so this is the first of Sebastian's 2 office hours for the summer. If you're putting it on your calendar, January 25th will be his second one. Okay, Sebastian, are you ready to go?
Hi, summer students. It's great to not see you, I guess. And it's now a tradition. This is the only class where I ever do this, where we have an online office hour where I answer questions. And as usual, I'm completely unprepared, so I'm going to read the questions as I answer them. And there's many, like 3 pages.
Yes, we had a decent number there. If you'd like, I can read them out for you.
You want to read them out? Sure.
Sure. All right. So I'm just starting from the top. I've kind of grouped them. These are not in the order that they appear on Piazza. I've picked and chosen all the questions and tried to put them into groups. You, as a student, may not agree with the exact grouping I put your question in, but we're trying to set it so that Sebastian doesn't have to bounce around multiple different topics all over. So I call this group career and life advice. And so the first one is, what advice do you have for someone who's just getting exposed to self-driving cars, wants to pursue this field further? What do we do after the course, eventually, to get a job with a company like GM, Tesla, or Volkswagen Group?
Yeah, so obviously the world's only curriculum on self-driving car happens to be in Udacity. It's called a non-degree program. It's actually much cheaper than the master's you're currently pursuing. And you're most invited to apply and join this. People who've gone through this program often found employment long before the program was over. We have career fairs here in Silicon Valley, at least once, maybe twice a year, where companies meet those students. Last Intersect, we had about 30 or so companies lined up. All the names you imagine. Google was there, of course, Waymo, Tesla, GM, Ford, Mercedes, and all these companies. And typically our students are in demand.
All right. What would an entry-level position look like in robotics? So how can a career changer who haven't worked in tech before get into the entry-level positions?
Every robotics company, every robotics project has many different levels of engineers. Perhaps the most advanced would be like machine learning and system architect. But even the lower level work, the simple work of building, for example, interfaces between a piece of sensor and the robot hardware require engineering. So the trick is to just apply at a company that does robotics and make sure you go into this space and then grow in that space.
All right. Do you have any specific advice different from what you just said about someone who wants to go from this class and program to getting involved in autonomous robotics in general?
Robotics is a very fast, rapidly growing industry. And if you factor in self-driving cars, it's a really big and important industry. So the trick is to find a job there.
All right. So in your opinion, do people who kind of pursue in the OMSCS program, there's the branch, the Computational Perception and Robotics branch of computer science. Do people who go into this branch typically have a background in engineering? And what would a minimum viable CV kind of look like for someone who's trying to get a job in this computational perception and robotics field?
Well, obviously, to do the CS master's degree, you very, very likely have an engineering background and to be admitted into Georgia Tech. And you definitely have a computer science background by the time you enter the specialization. So that's good. There's no black and white answers. I've seen students with minimum background excel really well, and I've seen very well-equipped students just being lazy. It doesn't really help. There's also no recommendation of minimum CV. The master's degree, when you have it, would certainly shine. And I know the Georgia Tech computer science master students never seem to have trouble finding jobs.
All right. Any advice for an older person who's switching careers? So in this case, it's about 47 years.
Oh, my 47 is young. I'm older than 50. I think we tend to be our own biggest obstacle. people are driven and curious and are willing to go the extra mile. It might take a little bit more work to apply for a job than a 20-year-old fresh out of college. But with a geologic master's degree, you should be able to get interviews. And then it's really important to stay mentally young, like being curious, admit to yourself that the things you don't know, try to learn these things, as you are all doing, because you're all part of this amazing master's degree.
All right, this question is pretty open-ended. If you could go back in time and give your 8-year-old version of yourself or your 8-year-old self some advice, what advice would it be?
That's a great question. Be kind, be curious. I think in Germany, people tend not to be radical about asking all questions. It's a very kind of cemented society where many things are taken for granted the way they are. And I learned in Silicon Valley that when you're willing to ask all the questions, you arrive at much more interesting answers. Like, for example, why can't cars fly? Hey, the previous question for the quote-unquote old guy 47, Udacity just yesterday launched a whole bunch of free career courses that help with things like interview preparation and CV. And those are actually good. I find that the number one problem when Udacity students come out, why they might not find a job, is often self-confidence. And it's great to get professional advice how to do this well, and you feel better about yourself. So come to our site, pay $0 and get educated. This time together with Google. Google has funded this. Okay, next question.
All right, I'm moving into industry questions. These are more about the industry. So what are the gaps, for example, opportunities for innovation and for small businesses to get involved that you see in the marketplace today related to the self-driving car robotics field? So what are places for small businesses to get involved?
Oh my God, so many. Number one, robust and affordable hardware, like building low-cost lasers, low-cost radars, building better radars. There's a huge field that's potential. Number two is software, any software component that takes data and turns it into something interesting. The self-driving car field is pretty flooded right now in terms of companies. There's many, many companies. They're all looking for people, but there's no shortage of startup companies today. There was 3 years ago. I would probably leapfrog straight to flight and flying vehicles because that's as nascent as self-driving cars was 5 years ago, and get engaged there. If you watch CNN today, Kitty Hawk just released a video where we trained a reporter from CNN to fly on one of these devices, and that industry will certainly grow as well.
All right. What is the single biggest challenge facing the industry in terms of making autonomous vehicles a reality?
I used to say safety, and I think now it's cost and sustainable business models. So I think the costs for none of the players are where they have to be to build sustainable business models. But I would say Waymo and others are well on the way.
Right. And what companies or institutes are among the top players of developing and commercializing the self-driving cars? So you mentioned ones, maybe just go back over the list for people who interview with your nano degree.
I mean, obviously, Waymo is probably most advanced, both in its experimentation and its technology. But I think the gap is closing. There's many companies from GM to Mercedes to BMW to even ride-sharing companies like Uber and Didi who are really kind of closing the gap. So I would say in 3 to 4 years' time, there will be no clear answer.
Okay. Moving into societal impact and policy. My voice seems to be back here. Maybe you better read the question with that. Were you picking up feedback on my voice there?
Yes, a little bit.
Yeah, it might be better if you just read the questions and went through it, because your voice seems to be doing better.
All right. So what fields of AI, machine learning, with reinforcement will change the way we live in the next 5 to 10 years? A great question. My summary of machine learning is that now we can look at people, at ourselves, and pick up repetitive pattern, stuff where there's lots of data. This could be low-paid people like truck drivers who do the same thing over and over again, or extremely highly paid people like medical doctors and lawyers. And as you pick those up, we can give people superhuman powers to do the same tasks much more efficient, and possibly even without the person in the loop. And that's something, there's here a whole bunch of interesting startup companies coming up that look into areas like online sales and others and pick up those patterns and then make salespeople 2, 3, 4 times as effective in closing a deal. That kind of superhuman power that we can take, observe one person here and then take the skill of the person and get it into another person's brain, it's going to completely change society, because now almost all repetitive work will become superfluous. How prepared is the current state of the United States infrastructure for handling a fully autonomous network of self-driving cars? And are other nations better? It turns out the way we built a self-driving car didn't require any infrastructure change. And that's a remarkable thing, because there were a whole bunch of experts who, prior to our work, believed that you needed to massively change infrastructure. For example, there were teams that believed you had to bury magnets in the road to guide the car along the road. And the infrastructure-heavy projects all have the same chicken and egg problem, which is no one's going to pay for this unless you have many of the self-driving cars. But if they don't work yet, no one's going to buy a self-driving car. So I think the current phase is that every car is self-contained. And only as these numbers get very, very large will I predict there will be some infrastructure needs. For example, at some point, there might be no stop signs or no traffic lights anymore. All right. It's over-optimistic to say the next generation, 18 years old in 15 years or so the 3-year-olds, is not going to need a driver's license. What's your vision for autonomous vehicles? Well, my vision for that is that, first of all, they don't need a driver's license. In fact, even today, in the United States, you can use Lyft or Uber and get around very well. So you don't need a driver's license today. The only reason why you don't like Lyft and Uber is because it's expensive. And I think the self-driving car has the potential to be a third of the cost. So it'd be cheaper than driving your own car in the future as it rolls out. My vision for the future, well, check out CNN today on Kitty Hawk. That's a big part of it. As human drivers eventually begin to get phased out, do you see a new type of job being created in lieu of human drivers? Yes, typically as these innovations come along, new jobs are being found. Now, I believe right now, truck driver is the #1 job in many, many states. And there will never be a need for as many people in this new industry as we have today. And that's true for every technological innovation. It used to be that 75% of us work in agriculture, and now it's less than 2%. But as people free their time, they invent completely different jobs, right? The type of jobs we have today, from airline pilot to plumber to electrician to radio moderator, almost any job today didn't exist 200 years ago, and we wouldn't even think about it. So it's very hard for me to think what these jobs might be, but they will come because we will keep ourselves busy and we will become a better place. Humans drive eventually begin. So what kind of non-technical challenges people are dealing with in order to bring a self-driving car to a family? The non-technical challenges. I would argue the biggest aspect of self-driving cars will always be societal acceptance. And we saw this in cases when there's accidents, that there's a debate about it. And always on the sidelines looking, where does the debate go? Does it mean that all of a sudden people turn against this technology or not? The way we built the car at Google and now Waymo was very, very easy to use. So there was no issue about the usability. The interface were very, very simple. So I think the problems are much more business problems and technical problems. Okay. Page 2, making progress. What are the situations where the driver, this is for self-driving technical questions. What situations where the driver intervention is required? Okay. Can the self-driving car also manage the internals of the vehicle before complete breakdown, like brake failure? So the self-driving car that I was involved with monitors itself and can safely come to a halt, even if its entire computer system fails. It can safely survive a blown tire and similar things, even though these things are hard to handle for people. The failure modes, I would have to talk to Google about the latest ones, but they tend to be really rare things. And I remember one from the time I ran the team, where we had a plastic bag blown over a highway, and the plastic bag was big, but it was in midair. And for a human driver, it looked like a plastic bag. For the robot, it looked like a rock, a flying rock. And the car ended up going in a brake action, and we had to take over to avoid the car behind us colliding with us. So these are kind of things, they're all kind of combinations of weird stuff. It's really rare, but these weird things are often enough. Like this morning when I was driving my Tesla, I found a water heater on the highway. Right? How many water heaters have you seen on the highway in the last 10 years? But it turns out if the car cannot avoid a water heater, then I'd say at least once a year or so, there might actually be a collision on the highway. All right, what's next? How do you design an autonomous system that deals gracefully with unknowns? That's the magic question. I wish I knew. You kind of test the system so long that almost everything that might encounter you have encountered. And then you have very smart engineers that make simulations where you do stuff you would never do in reality, like throwing babies down on the highway. So you can test all that. But at the end of the day, my philosophy is if you test it long enough, it's the same with people, right? So we live and have a limited amount of data that you take in our life. And if we do this often enough, we become more and more proficient. The self-driving car has one advantage over people, which is if you and I make a mistake in driving, then we learn from it, but normally nobody else learns from it. But in the self-driving car case, all the other cars learn from the same mistake, including all the unborn cars. So you get a multiplicity effect in robotics technology that could never get the same way with people. The cross-people learning is much, much slower. It involves regulators and books and legislators. It takes much longer to share experiences. We all make the same driving mistakes all the time. The self-driving cars don't. Okay. What are your thoughts on remote human intervention to handle edge cases when autonomy fails? That's a great question. And that's something that's actually really, really interesting, really much debated. How will these vehicles be monitored from a distance? And will there be cases where the person, a distant monitor, might make an intervention to simplify a situation? When I ran the team, this came up for doubly parked cars. We had a situation where our self-driving car was just not allowed to cross the double yellow line to go around the UPS truck or the U-Haul truck. And we built an interface where a remote person could approve that action so that the car wouldn't be stuck forever and waiting for the U-Haul truck to finally disappear. The bigger problem is when things change and the car is unaware of it. That causes problems. For a long time, we had difficulty with construction zones. And even today, I was driving behind a Waymo car, so it turns out, and there was a construction zone, and the car literally got stuck and was standing there for 2 minutes until the human driver finally decided to take over. We were behind the car honking the horn, somewhat upset, but I was also smiling and thinking, wow, here's one case where obviously I just saw a human takeover of a Waymo car. The annoying thing in this case would not be that you jeopardize anybody in traffic, but that you just wait for no reason because the car lacks quite the skill to deal with a specific situation. Now those all get back, funneled back to the mothership, and then engineers, much smarter than me, get to solve these issues. Okay. Do you artists incorporate OCR for reading signs or the LED boards? Yes, we do, and there's a lot of work on sign recognition from stop signs, construction signs, temporary signs, and temporary speed limits. Do you believe that self-driving cars with LiDAR and SLAM have some level of visual consciousness? So the word conscious is one of the most debated words on the planet. It's even debated whether animals have consciousness, and it really depends on the definition. I would say I abstain usually from discussions. What I observe is that people get very religious about it. And some people I've seen basically say the moment a machine does it, it cannot be consciousness, because consciousness is innate to people. If you ask me from a pragmatic perspective, I would argue that the level of reasoning that takes place in environment awareness is very similar to what I feel when I'm conscious. So when I go around and walk around and look at the environment and have an internal representation and try to avoid collisions, if you look at the level of consciousness, I would say our cars do the same stuff. But again, it's a very religious question. And as a matter of fact, I would advise all students to just abstain from this because it's not a good technical question. We get very emotional. And the same with the trolley problem, which is also not a technical problem, just a philosophical mind game that is not useful to discuss, in my opinion. Okay, academic research, algorithms. What is the current research focus on self-driving cars? There's been a shift, massive shift from geometric 3D thinking and probabilistic thinking towards machine learning. So if you take one thing away from this class, is then this class is already a little bit outdated, it turns out. The most recent work is all based on deep learning and camera images, and there's been enormous progress. So I highly recommend looking into deep learning as the follow-on to this class. What do people do in academic research and localization do these days? What's the main hot areas in robotics research in general? It's interesting. When you look at industry versus academia, I get to the point where I think in robotics now, academia is moving slower than industry. So in industry, I think the SLAM problem is long solved. In academia, it's not. There's still massive papers coming out. I'd say in industry, the localization problem is basically solved. And in academia, it's not. There's still paper coming out. And the reason is academia has these pocket effects where people from a certain trade that have a certain style of research review each other's papers. And if there's enough of those, you get something that can live for a long time. In AI, there used to be topics like agent-based AI or non-monotonic reasoning that lived for AI and planning systems that lived for many, many decades without having any significant impact on the physical world. But because researchers had this network effect of reviewing each other's papers and giving each other's PhD theses and the PhD advisors for tenure and so on. So I would actually really look at industry as well and see what the problems are there to guide my academic research, which is what I'm doing. Which schools are mostly active in robotics research? In the United States, obviously the top four, Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley, Georgia Tech, definitely very strong, University of Washington. I would say these are the stronger players. Probably overlooking somebody here who's very strong. So my apologies for the people whom I overlooked. Internationally, definitely Zurich, very strong. Munich, Freiburg with Wolfram is very, very strong. And then, of course, I don't know much about China, but these are the strong fields. There's a couple of really good universities in Singapore that I would recommend in robotics. Okay, what role do learning, and of course, Udacity. We are very strong in robotics, not in research, but in education. We are bleeding edge, okay? What role do learning algorithms play in robustly supporting driverless navigation environments that are less structured, highly dynamic, and cluttered? So learning algorithms in general have basically taken over a good chunk of perception, and it's amazing to see they're so much better. In many cases, they're better in analyzing images than people are. You can test this, right? You can test what people see, and you can test what machines see, and machines often have a better understanding what's going on. Dynamic environments are no exceptions. I would say classical work in robotics is really good at things that are well defined, like cars, because they have a certain shape and certain size, and there's only that many different types. And they're really bad in stuff that's incredibly undefined, like the plastic bag being blown over the highway. That's where machine learning eventually will have a massive edge over anything else. I recently took reinforcement learning from Georgia Tech and would like to know your view with respect to how RL combined with PID control and conventional robotics methods can help with developing self-driving cars. Or is RL not suitable for self-driving cars? I've been blown away by the progress in reinforcement learning ever since Andrew Ng at Stanford flew helicopters with reinforcement learning. If you look at the advanced stuff in controls, Andrew Ng's work stands out, Raft Andreas' work stands out at Zurich. And what they all have in common is a very adaptive method for building models and then optimizing the controller on the fly for those models. So if I were to go into control in a serious way, I would skip PID control, even though it's a really fun thing to learn, understand, and know, and understand what the issues are, and go straight to advanced reinforcement learning. Still keep it possibly simple, but give our machine the ability to build their own models much more flexibly. That most of the engineers don't do this because most people who do control come out of EE, and EE people don't talk about this stuff. And the people who computer science, they fall in love with perception, usually more than control, and then do deep learning for perception. Okay, what role do learning algorithms play in robustly supporting driverless navigation environments that are less structured, highly dynamic, and cluttered? We have this already? Okay, case 3. The last 4 questions. Future course questions. For introductory bachelor level CS, there are many curricula that are freely available, and the question asker has actually linked 3 of them. Have you seen something similar for robotics and engineering? The answer is no, I have not. I would say Udacity, Coursera, and the MOOC companies are probably at the forefront. So is MIT OpenCourseware, which is by far the largest MOOC company, in my opinion. But the robotics work is so much more specialized that there's a much smaller market for it than computer science. Computer science is 10, 100 times as large, and as a result, there's much less work out there. Again, if you're serious about it, obviously it's self-promotion here, but I highly recommend checking out Udacity. We have an entire nanodegree program on robotics, one on computer vision, and several on AI in the School of AI. I think we have the most complete curriculum of anyone in the world at this point in this field. If you were to create AI for robotics 2, which topics would it include? It's a great question. Honestly, I would probably really focus on systems building and building complex systems, like build a drone that can fly indoors from a kitchen to a living room repeatedly, and make it project focused, because algorithms only get you a certain length. And if you start thinking like a roboticist, you understand probabilities. I can certainly, I have written a book on this, 668 pages of math, and it can make your life horrible by forcing this to learn all these equations. But I don't think there's much more to be known than in this class, plus deep learning, plus maybe some adaptive control. I think the second step will be learning by doing. And honestly, for $50, you can buy yourself on Amazon a nice robot with a few sensors, and try something really hard. Make it go literally. Maybe it's a mobile robot from a kitchen to your bedroom. Have it take a picture and drive back. And you learn so much more doing this, and it's so much more fun. Trust me, this is how I got into it. I just build stuff, and I love building stuff. I can tell you all the theoretical stuff I've done, from probabilistic robotics and SLAM, is all driven from having built a system, having failed, and then having finally succeeded, and then thought about what did I learn, and then putting it into equation. I never start with equation. I always start with systems. It's much more fun, and your work is much more relevant. Okay, in this class, we have determined optimal policies for macro decision processes in grid worlds with actions like left, right, EDT. Any suggestions for applying MDP to problems where either the states, actions, or both the states and actions are not known or are too large? In MDP world, the dogma is that you have access to the state, which is usually a lie, and that you know your actions, which is less of a lie, because making a physical actuator is actually fairly clear what the actions usually are. There's uncertainty involved. An MDP model is just fine, in my opinion. The bigger lie is this knowledge of the state, and state is typically very, very unknown. And the parts of the state you don't model correctly, you treat like noise, as independent noise, but in practice could be dependent noise, which could massively mislead your solution. I would say the question also hints at continuous action spaces, like what if it's a real robot and we have a continuum for turn signals. There's a book, a paper I wrote with Dmitry Dolgov, who's the second in command at Waymo now, called Hybrid A star, which I highly recommend, because we took something like A star, which is related to Markov decision processes, and were able to derive from it with some granularity a completely continuous executable trajectory for a robot that had steering and gas and brake. And those tricks that we apply, we still discretize the world, but we had a way to keep track of continuous outcomes. Those tricks would equally apply to MDPs. Simplified speaking, the most important stuff is, if you want to go to continuous, is that you take the solution of MDP, or maybe a path of a path planner, and then smooth it out using least square methods, using springs and splines. And again, hybrid A star is the topic, and that was probably my single best work on robot navigation and path planning. Do the things you learn from ground vehicles in this class transfer well to self-flying aircraft like Cora, or is it a different ballgame? There's overlap. So I would say in self-driving cars and in robotics, I would say 80–90% of the work is perception and perception and prediction. And the reason is you're on the ground, and what you really care about is that you don't hit anything, right? And everything that you might hit is pretty much on the ground. There's almost nothing in the air. If you don't trust me, look out your window and count the number of airplanes right now. You'll find probably 0, maybe 1 if you're lucky. Look on the ground and look at the parked cars and the kids running around and bicycles and traffic lights and mailboxes, probably a few hundred bushes, right? So the stuff is on the ground. And to avoid those, the hard part is perception. In the air, it's different. In the air, the hard part is control. So you're dealing with a vehicle that is exposed to wind, that might be under-actuated, that wants to conserve energy, wants to find the best way to go from A to B, given the current wind situation or weather situation. And then it becomes much more of a control issue. And the control of an air vehicle is much more complicated than a car. In a car, you can stop, right? You have 2 choices. You can left and right. You have about 2 degrees of freedom, steering and gas brake, the second one. In a air vehicle, there's many, many more degrees of freedom. Like, for example, what happens if you have Cora with 12 lift fans and you lose one? what's going to happen next. That kind of stuff is much more emphasized. The second thing we actually emphasizing on another degree for flying cars is the coordination of many vehicles, like airspace management, collaborative path planning, and emergency situation under many vehicles. So you can go and learn that as well if you want. With that, I have about 4% battery left, and I'm out of questions. Hey, anything comments?
Right. Thank you very much for your time. I guess the one last standard question is, can you think of any good questions that they missed this time around?
Oh my God. I want to just express my admiration for all of you for doing this, probably at an age or situation that is not very common for college and master degrees. I would say that the smashing success of this great degree program with Rototech is a smashing success of the students more than anything else. I want to encourage you to stick with it and encourage you to take this not as a set of solutions, but as an opportunity to be curious. The people that do best are people who are curious and open-minded, admit to themselves they might not know something, want to learn about it, and that have grit and get it done and carry it through. In that vein, if you, over the summer, after done with this, buy yourself a robot and make it do something interesting, please send me a video. It's thrun@udacity.com, and I will definitely reply to you and want to watch it, okay? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you next month.
All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.